Hey everyone, Margarita here. In this video, I'm going to give a timeline of all of the nonstop agency and system harassment that my mother was using to continuously harass me. It's been going on nonstop my entire life, and it started at a very young age before the trust was left for me. So in this video, I'm going to talk about from birth all the way to age 18. And then I'm going to make a separate video once I turned 18 and I was in my own home and I started my own life separately. It continued on immediately. And it's still going on in the current day at age 42. And this is 2026. So the second video will be from 2002 to the current day in 2026. This video will be from the 1980s all the way until 2002. It's literally been nonstop the entire time. I've never gotten to live my life. It may have appeared that I did get to live my life for a little while, but in all actuality, I was not. The agency harassment and the systems chasing me and all the false reporting was going on the entire time. It has never stopped. And it's destroyed every aspect of my life to where I'm left today, where I'm left permanently injured for the rest of my life. And I have been for the last 10 years. And that's also due to my mother's crimes, the false reporting to the different systems and agencies and all the agency harassment. It's due to that as well, every step of the way. So this was kind of long. I've already tried to film this a couple times. And what I did, that's why I decided to break the video into 2 videos. And I have notes on all of these circumstances because it's just too much to try to wing it. I can't seem to remember everything or squeeze it all in because there's just so many things that have happened. The harassment is so extravagant that there's no way for me to just kind of wing it. And even though I've written a lot of this down, there's things that I'm leaving out and that I've forgotten, or there's just so much. And a lot of this is overlapping and ongoing. And once it started, then the fallout will go on for months to years. And the next situation would happen. That fallout will go on for months to years. And it continued on in that manner nonstop to where it eventually got to the point where my life was at a dead stop and I can't make any further moves. And it's been that way for about 2 years. Ooh, excuse me. I can't make any further moves until arrests are made. And this is all situated and my money's turned over to me. And it's due to the long-term results of all of this, what has all gone on, and the manner in which I'm left permanently injured as well. So it all plays a role. Okay, so this is going to start with the 1980s. I was born in 1983 at the end of the year. And although I was not left the trust until 1989, I believe, this had already started prior to the trust being left. Part of the way she was able to get away with this is because she repeated so many delusions to every person she's ever known and placed all these delusional phone calls prior to the trust being left and continued it forward after that and had never stopped. Even when I cut all ties at 18 and left, still going on. Nobody ever realized I cut ties. Nobody ever realized that there was never a relationship. There's never been contact. And so that's how it was able to continue on. But initially, she would repeat delusions to all of my teachers and my dad and other people. And it would just start with her placing delusional phone calls over the phone to them regularly with nobody else around her or only me hearing her, or she would do this in person and I would sometimes hear her. And then I tried to confront her numerous times prior to the trust being left. And that's where she would tell me how nobody's ever going to believe me and laugh like a deranged lunatic and then gaslight me and cause reactive abuse situations to where she would start gaslighting me so heavily. And like the abuse was so extreme that when what she would do is she would wait, she would do it so nobody would see her. And then she'd wait till another person would come around and she'd like amplify what she was already doing the last few minutes. And it would get to the point where I would snap as a little kid. I'd be like 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, didn't matter the age. This went on my whole life. So I didn't understand what I was dealing with or how to handle it. And I never knew anything different. And I didn't ever have anybody to turn to. So when somebody else would come around in that moment, she would make it look like I'm the problem. And then the person would only see me screaming and crying. And it's because I'm screaming at her and crying because of what she's done. And the other person only sees that and didn't see what she actually did a few minutes prior. And so that's gone on my entire life. And then once I cut all ties at 18, it pretty much stopped, but there has been some like crossing of paths here and there from that day to this day. But she has still attempted it and still has tried to pull it off along the way from time to time. And that is also how the 2013 escapade began as well. So if you go watch that video, that's how it all started. There was nobody around when it started. By then I was almost 30. And because I have always done very well for myself financially, and I was making big business moves and big moves at that time, instead of me being able to carry out those moves, she destroyed everything with lies and delusions and systems and false reporting and false court proceedings and such. But that's how it all started. So if you watch that video, that's how that started. But there was very few crossing of paths all along the way. And then once I had the brain injuries as of the last 10 years, I don't have the ability to argue and go back and forth. And because my brain was so injured for so long and I was such an extreme state of pain and suffering, even when I did cross paths with her after my dad had his injury, these tactics were no longer going to work because of what I had physically been through, and mentally and emotionally. And I'm not able to like have those type of reactions or operate in that manner because of what happened to me physically. So I don't think she realized like where the change happened or what happened, because she's been lying to everybody that there ever was an injury. So even though she's attempted these tactics in the recent years, it doesn't work. So I'm going to start with 1989-ish, right before I was left the trust. Yes, she was already repeating delusions to all these people about me because I'd already confronted her on lying, and that's where the gaslighting and reactive abuse would start. And then I caught her poisoning the batches of food, and that's where it continued on further. But because I'd confronted her on the poison batches of food, she had to make sure nobody would ever believe me. So that's where her lying and her delusional phone call placing amplified with every family member she's ever had, everyone she's ever talked to, every friend, every coworker, every neighbor. And then once I started school, she began calling every teacher at the beginning of every school year and told them all these things about me that weren't real, causing them to operate on her behalf, harass me and abuse me on her behalf as well, acting as if what she had said to them was actually real. There was a small handful of teachers who did not participate in this, and they saw that there was a problem and knew that she was the problem. I don't think, like, beyond them trying to help me in that moment, there was nothing they could really do about it. Because I think they realized they were going to make my life worse if they did try to step in. So no one really tried to step in, but there was about 3 or 4 teachers along the way who did recognize she was the issue. And my 6th grade teacher was the only one who, when he confronted me, because some of these teachers would confront me, he confronted me in the very beginning of the school year, and I had known him from the previous year from helping out after school. And he never knew me to act that way, so he got to know the real me first before she placed the delusional phone call to him that year. And when I think he saw by the way I was reacting to what he was saying, he realized, and then he knew me from the previous year a little bit, he realized that whatever was said was not real, because I cut him off and I just said, she's lying. And then he just said, well, why would she do that? And I said, I don't know. She does it all the time. So because of the way everybody else reacted all my life, and they react negatively and think I'm the one lying and they just believe her, I expected him to react that way, and he didn't. So he kind of just cut it off and he left it alone. And I think that's when he realized she was the problem, and nothing ever came of it the entire school year. He never acted like some of these other people did along the way. So he was one of the ones that did not react poorly. And the other couple that did not was, so his name was Mr. Hammett. He was the 6th grade teacher at Bates Elementary. And then Mrs. Sargent was the 5th grade teacher at Bates Elementary. And it was Mrs. Holinsky. And she was the English and Spanish teacher in high school at Woodhaven High School at that time. And those were the only ones who recognized I was not the issue and did not participate in the harassment against me. So, this all, like I said, this started before the trust was left. So this was already going on because I already caught her lying. I already caught her poisoning food. Here she's trying to cover up in advance in case I do try to tell somebody, because I did threaten her and tell her I was going to tell on her. So she was afraid I was going to tell somebody at school. But because of the harassment and the way she treated me and the narcissistic abuse and the gaslighting and all that, I didn't actually try to tell anybody because of the threats that were being made to me. And she was also making me believe that my dad was aware she was acting this way toward me, or that he backed her up in some way, although that wasn't exactly what was said. It's the way she made me perceive it. And I didn't realize that he didn't recognize this until 2019, after I had 2 brain injuries and I was under treatment repairing the brain tissue. That was when I finally said something to him. So he didn't know all along. And then when I did finally try to tell him about 7 years ago, it was not clicking for him what actually happened and what had been going on and what was still going on. So I was never able to fully get through to him. I think he did try to go home and confront her at that time, and it only made matters worse. She only started creating more and more problems at that time from behind the scenes in my life, with the people around me and with more agencies. So it didn't really matter. It would have happened if I would have did that back then. That would have been the same result. So now there was times at the dinner table she would also repeat the delusions and lies. She would say things to my dad. It would just be the three of us. She would say things that she would tell him lies about me, or things I did that I didn't actually do. She would just make up a bunch of lies at the dinner table, and I'd be sitting there, and I wasn't allowed to say it. I wasn't able to talk. I wasn't able to speak up for myself or say anything. And it was because of the way she would treat me when she would get me alone, which was a lot of the times because it was just the three of us and I had nowhere to turn, nobody to turn to. And my dad would be at work longer than my mom sometimes. So if we were ever alone together, she would then gaslight me and cause reactive abuse situations and narcissistically abuse me and threaten me and physically abuse me. It'd be all these things that she would do. So I wasn't able to say anything when she was doing this at the dinner table. And I just had to let her keep lying to him right in front of me. And I think that's also part of the reason she was able to carry this out for so many decades and why it's still going on today, why he never woke up to the reality of it. So that went on the entire time. And I eventually, when I started working, I started babysitting at age 11, but I started working in restaurants at age 14, and I was no longer there at dinner time. So she was probably still doing it, but I was gone already. And then I bought my own home at 18. So that's kind of where I wasn't sitting there any longer, but I'm pretty sure this was still going on all along. And so all those times I just had to act like, I just sat there silently while he's listening to her, and there's nothing I could do about it. So that all started before the trust was left and then carried on more heavily after the fact. So right away, like I said, it started with all my teachers, which is around the time the trust was left. It just became more amplified because she intended on making sure I was either deemed mentally incompetent and then eventually incarcerated or deceased going forward, because she wanted to make sure that money went to her from the day it was left. Now, that's also how she grew the false narrative long term. She just kept repeating all this stuff long term. It never stopped. It's still going on today. It was literally every school year, every teacher, and she would do it at the beginning of every school year or even prior to school starting. So on the first day, I would already have a really bad first day every year. It happened many times. And then when I got to the point where I was old enough where I had more than one teacher, she would call all teachers. So that continued on until she managed to end up getting me kicked out of high school in my 11th grade year, with her delusional phone call placing and the problems she would create in the setups. So I will get to that toward the end of this. But so this went on literally every school year and every night at dinner and every day. This never changed. The nice person that she shows everybody that she is, that's not who she truly is. That's a fake personality. The person I'm describing is who she is at home and what she was doing all along. That nice person that she shows everybody she is, she was never that person to me. She was a deranged lunatic every step of the way, and then laughing like a deranged lunatic after she'd get away with lying and causing all these problems right in my face every step of the way. That's still going on today. So I guess where it became very extreme, it was fifth grade where it became very extreme. For me, that was year 1994, 1995. So, like maybe 5 years after the trust was left, that's where it started to become even more extreme. 2 out of the 3 of those teachers participated very heavily, and they jumped in on it. They were narcissists themselves, and they all fed off of each other the entire school year. And it got to the point where the kids all saw this going on, and all my classmates joined in on the harassment as well. And by the end of the school year, I could barely get through each day. Like, I didn't even want to be here anymore at that time because of what was going on. there was only a couple people who didn't join in. And some of these people are my Facebook friends today. So a lot of people would remember this. And the two teachers that participated heavily that year were Mrs. Whitaker and Mrs. Thompson, who eventually became Mrs. Theobald. So that was she must have married the sixth grade teacher, Mr. Theobald. And I know this because my daughter ended up having her as a teacher in fifth grade. And that was about 10 years ago. She didn't know I was my daughter's mother until the last week of school when I came in there. And she knew exactly who I was. She remembered everything. The look on her face said it all. She looked like she saw a ghost. So because my daughter has a different last name, she didn't realize that was my daughter. And I do believe my mother was also calling the school when my daughter was in elementary school there at the same school I was at. I do believe she was calling and placing delusional phone calls there as well, claiming to have raised and had custody of my kids. And I do believe that was part of the look that woman gave me that day. So I don't know what exactly was said, but it was something that's not true. And then even back when I was the student, that year became so far out of control. It was like literally every day there was a problem. And it would stem from my mother's delusional phone call placing. And it got to the point where I could no longer do my homework. I couldn't do my schoolwork. If it wasn't done in class, I couldn't do it at home. And then what would happen is before my dad would get home from work, I would get so heavily gaslit. And she would just scream so many delusions at me and cause the problems till I'd eventually freak out, which is reactive abuse. It would get to the point where I'd like crumble up the paper and just throw it, and I wouldn't be able to do it because of what she was doing. So I got to a point where I just couldn't do the work anymore because of what she was doing. And then when I go to school, I'd experience the same thing, and it never stopped the entire school year. So at one point, Mrs. Thompson, her name was Brenda. Her first name is Brenda. I don't know if she's still working, but she was 10 years ago. And she accused me of stealing a book from class to finish a project. And at that time, we were allowed to take books home from classrooms and just bring them back the next day, and it wasn't a big deal. But because there was like a student in a different classroom that was using the same book for their project, she accused me of stealing it and confronted me in the hallway, called me all these names, told me I was a lying, sneaky little cheat, never going to get anywhere in life. I'm all these things, basically what my mother told her. And I wasn't lying or stealing any of it. I said, yeah, I have it in my locker because I was going to take it home and finish the project and bring it back. But she assumed for some reason that I was going to steal it, which I don't know why, because we regularly took home books at that time and brought them back with no problem. But you got to understand that my mother was placing all these delusional phone calls all year long. This was in the spring. It was almost toward the end of the school year. And they were basically feeding off of each other's delusions about me and all these lies and just passing them back and forth. And my mother would call from her work phone. So my dad, this all went on behind my dad's back. He was completely unaware this was going on all these years. And she would call her work phone. They would feed off each other. And then she would threaten me how she's going to call my mom. But it was really my mom feeding her all the delusions from the jump, and then them just continuously feeding off each other. I could be sitting there doing absolutely nothing, and I'd be accused of doing all these things I didn't even do. And it went on so heavily that like I literally just couldn't even get through the day anymore at that point. And then there was another time where we were doing like something in that same lady's class, and I didn't understand like where to write the answer, so I wrote it on a different line, and I was supposed to put it like under something else. And she started screaming at me in the middle of class, singled me out, told me how I was lying. I'm always lying. Those are my mother's delusions. That's not reality. But they had like tea and crumpets or something. Something had to do with the Boston Tea Party. And I was left out of doing any of that or participating as a punishment for like lying, even though I wasn't lying, and it was on just a different line on my paper. So, but it had to do with the long-term harassment of what they had been doing to me all year. And there was also another situation, like same year. So Mrs. Whitaker was the teacher, but we were moving from one class to the next. There were science fair projects up, and I was being accused of touching a science fair project, and it was one or two other students. And I knew who they were. And then I said something about who one of them was. Well, somebody went and told them it was me that did it, because now the kids saw that everybody was doing this to me and they joined in. So when I said who one of the people were that touched it, I then got singled out, yelled at, screamed at how I was the one that did it when I didn't. I wasn't anywhere near them. So it literally went on every day the entire school year. So I just didn't seem to think that that year was ever going to end at that time. And then eventually it did. And so the next year was sixth grade when I had Mr. Hammett, who then pulled me aside immediately. And that was the one who saw everything that happened when he confronted me. And I said, no, she's lying. And I thought he wasn't going to believe me. And then he did. Ironically, he did, and he just dropped it. So everything kind of went fine for the rest of that school year. And then I entered middle school after that, where I then had like 6 or 7 teachers going forward all the time. And this is where it got worse, because then she had numerous teachers join in on the situation. So there's more of them in on it, but there's also a couple that didn't participate. So there'd be like a little break here, like a 1 hour break here, or 1 hour break there, from the like harassment and abuse. So that went on all the way till I was no longer in high school, till she eventually succeeded at getting me kicked out. I stopped going to Latchkey also when I was like 10, and started riding the bus home because I couldn't handle being around other people. So the same year all that harassment and abuse went on in 5th grade, I also stopped going to Latchkey because I couldn't handle being around other people, because this just went on all the time for me, and I would have preferred to just be alone. So I would go home alone and sit there alone. And even though if it was for an hour or two, I would just have to sit there, and I'd have to not touch anything. I'd come a couple steps into their house when I'd get home, and I just wouldn't be able to touch anything. I wouldn't be able to move. Because my mother was like looking for any little thing out of place in the entire house. So I couldn't touch anything or roam about throughout the house, or like, eat anything, or like leave a crumb, or like I just had to take a couple steps into the room that I came in and just sit there and not move at all. And that's where the TV was, and I would just watch the TV, and I just wouldn't move. Because like she was literally just snooping through the whole house trying to find something wrong that I had done wrong while she was gone. So that was better than going to Latchkey and dealing with further harassment from students. So I stopped going to Latchkey when I was 10 and just kept riding the bus home at that point as well. Then, so by the time I got to like 10th grade, so this was in high school because our 9th grade was at a separate middle school. But when I got to 10th grade, that's when the very first day of 10th grade, she got a hold of the math teacher at that time. And this guy's name was Mr. Caudill. And she told him, I don't know, whatever lies she was telling everybody, told him all this stuff. I attended his class, and the girl in front of me turned around and set a piece of paper on my desk, and I didn't move. I was just sitting there. And immediately he flipped out, his face turned all red. He's screaming at me, pulls me in the hallway. He was this far from my face, screaming in my face. Very first day of high school, screaming all these things at me. And it had to do with whatever delusions my mother called and told him in advance. I don't know exactly what it was, but basically he's screaming at me how he's not going to put up with my shit. And I didn't do anything. I didn't even move, didn't touch the paper, had nothing to do with it, wasn't even talking to the girl. So with whatever she told him, he moved forward, and I got all E's in that class for the rest of the school year based on, he was grading me based on whatever he wanted to give me, not my actual work. And back then, things were different. They weren't computerized, and teachers could get away with that back then. So that's what happened to me that year. And I had such a horrible first day of high school that I actually wished this guy dead. And I later found out a couple years later, I worked with somebody who, when I said this, I told them this story, and they said, he actually died, right? And I was like, no, how would I know that? And I guess he had a heart attack in his car in Florida, driving to the airport a couple years after that happened. So that did end up happening. But I guess that's his own karma. I mean, you can't bully students in that manner. What these teachers did to me was illegal. If you want to get all technical, what they did was illegal. I will say that. I'd say about over the course of the entire time I spent in school, I'd say about 4 of them. About 4 of them. They participated. What they were doing was illegal. The harassment was illegal. So, okay. So now going forward after the 10th grade, or no, I guess you could say this technically happened in 10th grade. In 10th grade, that's when the my mom then called in and started talking to the principal. So the principal at this time was Miss Lapointe, and she stayed the principal for a couple years, or at least while I was there. Then she got all buddy buddy with the principal and got her in on all this as well. Um, then same year, she then calls in a bomb threat. I don't know if it was technically a bomb threat, um, or what threat exactly they labeled it, but she then somehow got Miss Lapointe to connect her to the school officer, who was Susan Meter, who was also a Brownstown police officer at that time at the Woodhaven High School. Got her to believe that a friend of mine and me were in my room that morning, plotting on how to either blow up the school or shoot up the school. I'm not sure what words exactly were used, but it was something along those lines. And what we were talking about had nothing to do with that. So she made the whole thing up. It was all delusions. Um, so later that day, I was called in to talk to Officer Sue Meter by myself, and the girl that was in my room that morning, she was also called in separately. And neither one of us had any idea what was going on, and we were both so confused that she couldn't move forward in any which direction if she wanted to, because she could tell that the two of us were so confused that we had no idea what the hell was going on. And then she asked me, she's like, "You don't know why you're here?" And I said, "No. Why would I know why I'm here? You called me here." So I don't know if apparently I don't know what happened. No charges came of it. Nothing was ever able to move forward, because you could tell the two of us were not talking about anything like that. She like went down the whole line of what we talked about that morning. Neither one of us were talking about anything like what was said. So she couldn't move forward, and she had to let us go. And then when I left and I told Miss Linsky was the teacher's class I was in when I got called down there. She was one of the teachers who saw something was wrong. I had her 2 years in a row for English and Spanish. And when I told her what happened, because I was so confused, she realized my mother was the problem. This is how I realized she realized that my mother was the problem. She started hugging me, and I really didn't get it. In that moment, I did not get it. So, um, she was kind of trying to tell me to be careful, but I didn't get it. Like, I fully did not understand what was going on, because this had been going on my entire life. So I really didn't fully understand it. But then she realized like how much danger I was in. And she basically did whatever she could to try to like keep me on the right path, or just like try to get me through high school, at least to like get me out of there, is what she was trying to do, without like telling me anything further. um but she definitely recognized there was a problem, and then I had her again the following school year. So that was all like 1999, 2000. And then it turned into the 11th grade school year, which was like 2000, 2001. And then at the beginning of that school, I took a psychology class. It was like one semester. And that's where I started learning about narcissism. But because there was no internet back then, and my mother controlled the flow of information, and I didn't understand things to that degree, and she made sure that I didn't know about like mental and personality disorders. But when I took that class, the book I had gave full descriptions of these things. So when I found narcissism, and I read it, I actually took it home and I said, "This is you." Like, I told her this was her. I told my mother this was her. And she flipped out. She went into a whole narc rage, went right into the gaslighting, the reactive abuse, all the whole nine yards. And she did some like things that, just now looking back on it, like, I shouldn't have did that, because I didn't know the consequences of dealing with a narcissist at that age. So I wasn't able to talk about it or tell anybody or say anything. But after that happened, she then put me in therapy and tried to deem me mentally incompetent, because now she needs me deemed mentally incompetent long term, because she's trying to gain access to the trust. And now that I'm aware of one of her disorders and what she's been doing, and now I got a name for it, how dare I become educated on what's wrong with her? So it turned into, she tried to flip the script on me and make it look like I'm the one with the disorder and I need to be diagnosed with something. That's where she then used this lady out of this same facility that she's currently using to my dad is talking to a lady, and it's basically because my mother's repeating delusions to him all day in the current, and I've been banned from him. And it's basically so that the lies and delusions that's coming out of her mouth and going into my dad's ears and comes out of his mouth to the lady, it's so it gets legally documented and it looks real, to counter what I'm doing with Charmaine and the documents she's been taking, all the notes of everything that's been going on in the last 6 years, all the crimes, everything that's gone on. She's doing that to counter what Charmaine has documented the last 6 years. So that same facility back then in 2000, 2001, that's where she takes me to basically get diagnosed, to basically prove I have this mental disorder and can't be given this money, can't take care of myself. I'm all these things that I'm not. And that's kind of how it started when I found the information in that psychology book. And in the year 2000 also, she attempted to have me put in Wyandotte Mental Hospital, like the very first week or two of school that happened. So I think that was my 11th grade year. I think it was still 2000 before it had turned 2001. And she was successful at it for about a week. And I didn't belong missing any school at that age. And what it was is she's still attempting to gain access to this trust fund. This is the beginning of her heavily trying to gain access to it. And because I was already working for a couple of years and I already had a good job and I already was planning on saving my money and moving out, it was going to be 2 years from then, or it would have been like a little over a year from then, because I was already almost 17. And I had already been working toward that. And I knew that was my only way out. I knew for some time. So I was attempting to be emancipated. And my dad found out that's what I was trying to do. So the whole mental hospital thing didn't end up working, because they got me in there. She got me in there basically by using the reactive abuse situations. And that's kind of how they got me there, because I still didn't understand how to control it, because I was so narcissistically abused and heavily gaslit my entire life that I didn't know how to control it, and didn't know how to like mentally override her behavior toward me. So that's how I was able to be put in there fraudulently. And so here she's trying to build this false case. And then here I knew I was smart enough and already making enough money that I was just going to make it on my own. It didn't matter. I was going to figure it out. I just need to be alone. So once I tried to start the emancipation process, they told my dad, and he came and got me out, because he was like, no. Because he knew I was going to cut both of them loose and I was never going to talk to either one of them again. And he knew it. So he came and got me out, and that got stopped. But then she had me going to some program that was at that facility where she's trying to have me deemed mentally incompetent. Now the mental hospital had tried to give me tranquilizers, which I didn't belong on anything at all. There was no problem with me. The problem is the deranged lunatic. So I was put on tranquilizers. They were knocking me unconscious, and I was drooling all over my books at school. And I wasn't on them for very long, but then that lady at that place got rid of them and gave me something called Celexa for depression. So they tried to diagnose me with depression when that's not at all what that was. It's extreme narcissistic abuse and a child that's been extremely abused, trying to get out on their own, knowing they're in danger and they're never going to be able to live their life. And I was just very quiet and like straightforward. And I have the intake paperwork. I have a picture of it because it showed up here in 2020. And you can tell it's not somebody with depression. You can tell it's a hardworking teenager knowing they're about to be on their own. And I put the amount of money I made every week, how much I work. And I thought that was fun because that was my only exit out. So all that happened. That lady gave me some pills that I didn't belong having. And I only took them like a few times, but because my mother went through my room every day of my life, she would literally go through my room. I had no privacy whatsoever. I knew she would go through my stuff, and I knew I wasn't supposed to take the pills, so I didn't take them, and I would just like stash them places. Well, this went on for about 2 or 3 months, so I had bags of them. Like I had small bags of them. They weren't big bags. But like my mom counted everything in her house, like every bag they have in the sandwich bag box in the cupboard, like every little thing, everything was in place. If one little thing was 1 inch out of place, she knew. So I got the bags from someone else. And at the time, like selling gram bags of weed was popular. And so they were actually like little empty weed bags. They didn't have weed in them. But that's where I put the pills in. And I had several of them because at this point I was accumulating these pills I was supposed to be taking, but knew I didn't need, so I didn't take them. And she was going through my room quite frequently. And at one point, I had a friend who was going through some things, and she really was depressed. And I said, well, these are for that. And I didn't even know that this was illegal because my mother controls the flow of information. So she made sure I didn't know my rights. So that way going forward, I would have a really hard time getting through life. I'd have a really hard time with like the criminal justice system, with any agency, any system. And it's because she planned on using those systems to harass me. So she started it by making sure I didn't know my rights or know how things worked. And I gave my friend a bag of those pills, like not all of them, just like a handful of them. And eventually, a couple weeks go by, and some girl at school asked for any kind of drug, didn't matter what it was, she was going to take it. Well, my friend gave her a few of them, and she had a severe allergic reaction, and they had to call an ambulance, but she knew they originated from me, so she gave them my name. So this actually happened at school, even though when I gave my friend the stuff, it was at home. But how would I know that's illegal when the deranged lunatic controls everything and controls the flow of information? So I get called down to the office. I then get arrested, and I had no idea like what was going on because I didn't have any of this information of anything that was going on. And I end up down at the Brownstown police station, and then my friend also gets arrested separately, taken down to the Brownstown police station. But then once we were spoken to, that same cop, Officer Meter, was involved in this, and I believe several other Brownstown cops. We were told that neither one of us were supposed to be charged, that we were going to be taken to the police station, we were going to be released to our parents, and that was going to be it. And then we were going to deal with the school suspension in front of the school board down the line, which we did. And then we did both go get taken to the police station separately. And then she got released to her mom, and there was no further issue. We ended up going through the board meeting or whatever, and we just were kicked out. She was kicked out of school for the rest of the school year. I think I was too, or I might have been expelled. It didn't matter because I never physically went back and personally ended up graduating through the mail. I already had my good job at that point, and I stayed with the same company for 5 years. So I never, I just graduated through the mail. And I was having such a hard time getting through school anyway because my mother's the one causing all of this. So those pills should have never been put in my possession because they should have never been given to me. It's my mother trying to access the stolen trust fund. It's her feeding false information to the lady at the place where she's sending me for this therapy. And it's my mother, and they're the ones orchestrating this when there's no problem with me. I'm not the problem. And either way, we were not supposed to be charged, neither one of us. My friend never got charged. I verified this with her. I believe it was 2020. And we can reach out to her today and verify it today. But she did not get charged. And at some point down the line, because I was also released to my parents drove separately. They left work, they drove separately. I left with my dad. My mom took an extra half hour to get home, and the police department's 5 minutes away. I never figured it out until about 6 months went by. And it didn't fully click for me until about 2019, 2020, when this all really clicked for me, what happened that day. The reason she took so long is because she stayed behind at the police department, and she got, I'm not sure exactly which officers were involved in this, but they went ahead and put a warrant out for my arrest and charged me with a felony anyways. And they charged me with an empty bag of weed and charged it as if it was weed, and it was just an empty bag. So they charged me with a misdemeanor and a felony for pills that I should have never had in the first place. So she's the one who got the charges put on me. And then my dad was unaware any of this ever went on. So I went home, went about my life, started working full time right away. I had 2 jobs at that time. And about 6 months go by and I get pulled over and somebody else is driving and I go to jail for this warrant that I'm unaware that I have. Don't even know how warrants work or how one gets one. So they made the mistake of calling the Woodhaven Police Department because it was Woodhaven High School. It was technically Brownstown Police Department. So I was taken to Woodhaven first. And they're asking why I didn't take care of this. And I said, well, how does one get a warrant? And then they explained it. And I said, well, no, I've never been in trouble. Because we weren't supposed to be in trouble. We were supposed to be released to our parents. There shouldn't have been any charges. So I was saying, no, I don't know how that would happen. And they were confused. And then they took me to the next police department, spend the night in jail. She orchestrated the whole thing. Then I was facing felony charges and didn't really understand what all that meant at that age. I was 17. Didn't understand it. Because here I'm being told one thing in my face, but here's my mother in the background orchestrating these events to happen with the Brownstown police. So this is where they initially started getting involved and causing problems in my life. and helping my mother orchestrate these events and taking payments from the stolen trust fund. This is where it all started. So then my dad has to take time off work. He takes me to the court the day I had court. And here they're trying to make me plead guilty to something that I didn't do. And I knew I wasn't guilty of any of it. So then I go in front of the judge and they convince me. So basically they coerced me to go in front of the judge and say all these things that I didn't do. And then I got in there and he's asking like, oh, you did this. So you're admitting this, you're admitting you did all this, you're entering a guilty plea. And I was like, no, I don't agree to that. No, I didn't do that. And then he's like, stop. They were like mad that I was like standing up for myself and trying to explain the truth. So then they take me aside and try to re-coerce me into going back in there and saying the same thing, but then they give me a different court date. And so it took like 3 times of them re-coercing me to say things that didn't actually happen and making me plead guilty to something I never did and to something that I should have never been charged with. So it was my mother who orchestrated all of it. My dad never had any clue that that's what happened during any of that time. I ended up with all these crazy things to do. I had to pay like $2,000, which was a lot for that time period. I had to do like 6 months community service. I had to do a workforce program. Mind you, I had 2 jobs. I'm working more than full time, and I was pregnant. By this time, I was pregnant with my oldest child because months had gone by. Like I was almost 18. And months had gone by. And so I was unaware any of this was even going on because it wasn't supposed to happen. All these things happened to me, but it was all orchestrated by my mother and her delusional phone call placing, and then her orchestrating the events to happen. And it turned into a situation. It turned into like more than I could physically do. And I was having issues with the pregnancy because of what they were trying to physically make me do so much work on top of the work I already did and was like working on buying my own home already. So it was a lot, and I started having like issues. And I think I was bleeding a lot and I almost lost the baby, and it had to do with what they were trying to make me do. And because it was a lot, like on somebody that young to work that many hours and then be added all this stuff. But either way, it was all orchestrated. None of that was supposed to happen. There should have been no charges. She was doing anything she could to try to get this to happen. And because that girl had such an extreme allergic reaction, they were talking about like me doing like 5 years in prison or something, or 2 years in prison, or I was only 17, but they were talking about this. And I know this because a tote showed up here about 5 or 6 years ago with the documents I'm talking about, the intake paperwork and some of the other things. This stuff showed up here at my house when I started exposing my mother during my injury publicly on Facebook. And some of the evidence was in there. And that's how I was able to piece all this together. So this information is fairly recent. Like some of this came out in that bin of paperwork and the things that were brought to my house like 5, 6 years ago. So I had some of this stuff back then, and there was a note in there because she would go through my room regularly. She would take things from my room. And there's even things she was able to get my dad to convince her to give her the keys to my first 2 houses. So she didn't belong in any of my houses. She was never welcomed. And my dad gave her the key. She convinced him to give her the keys to my first house and my second house one time each. She stole some things out of my house after she went through my home. Both times my home was either brand new or freshly remodeled. And she went through my house and stole a bunch of stuff. And I knew she did, and I couldn't prove it. And it wasn't until that tote showed up all those years later that I found all the stuff that was missing from my house back. It was in 2007. It was taken. It all showed up in that tote in 2019 or 2020. So here was the note from back at this time frame when I was 17, when all this happened. And it was, you could see my mentality when I read the note, because now I was like over 30 years old when I'm over here reading this note. And I could see like where my mind was at that time. And it's because my mom was trying to keep me dumb. And like, so I wouldn't have enough skills to be on my own. And then she kept poisoning the food all along. And that was playing a role in everything. And it played a role when I was pregnant with my oldest child as well, and some of the problems I had during pregnancy because she was poisoning the food all along. So when I was writing the stuff, you could tell my mentality didn't fully understand, is because she was orchestrating it to happen is what it was. But she was trying to make sure I would do prison time or be locked up long term, because that's what she was going for, so she could gain access to the trust. So I remember reading the note like 6 years ago or so. And that's how I was able to figure all this out. By then, I was already piecing together what had been going on. This was the beginning of me piecing everything together very heavily. Charmaine was already involved. I had already brought her in. So I was already piecing it together. So that's how it's kind of fresh on my mind, because I read it and then I brought everything to her to document everything. And then I burned a lot of it because I didn't want it in my house. So she did see it. She documented all of this. But that's not what ended up happening. Like, the girl ended up being fine. I just got like these charges that should have never been put on me, all this stuff. And it was like excessive issues that I had to squeeze into my life. And then, okay. So also at that same time frame, so first of all, I want to mention two of the people that she used. Okay, the lady who gave me those pills that shouldn't have worked for Apex Behavioral Health in Inkster, I believe it is. It's either Wayne, Michigan or Inkster, Michigan. Her name was Sandra L. Chambers. And I actually found her recently, but I don't think she's working anymore. But I found somebody who did work with her recently, but I was trying to get a hold of her and I couldn't. But her name is Sandra L. Chambers. And the lady at the Wyandotte Mental Hospital who helped my mother try to basically document this stuff falsely in my mental health file was Diane Satchel. And I know this because in that bin full of stuff that showed up here about 6 years ago, my mother saved people's business cards because she has the delusional phone call placing problem. So she would take people's business cards, and so was Officer Sue Meter. Her card was in there too. So she'd place all these delusional phone calls, and she'd get everybody's business cards so she could continue to place delusional phone calls all along. So those business cards were in that bin. So that's how I have their names. And then the whole point was literally to either just have me deemed mentally incompetent or doing like long-term jail or prison time is what it was, so she could get access to the money. And at the same time, here she was trying to she was also trying to send me away to a school across the United States somewhere, like in like Colorado or something. One in New York, one in Colorado, one in Arizona. I don't know, they were all over. There was like 5 or 6 of them, and she was trying to do this behind my dad's back. So she would fill out each packet, and when it would get to the point where it asked for the other parent's information, her filling it out would stop. And what she was trying to do was ship me off, and she was trying to use the police to help her. And she was basically, I'd be locked up in the school until I graduated or till whenever they wanted to let me go type thing. Honestly, it was probably some type of human trafficking program or something. I'm not sure. But she was unsuccessful because you have to have both parents' signatures, and she was doing this behind my dad's back. My dad would have never agreed to do it. And she couldn't find a school willing to go along with her without my dad's signature. And I knew this also because at the time, my best friend's mom had told me that my mom had called her and was asking all these questions about these schools and such, because she knew my friend's mom had looked into these schools. So she called her and started asking all these questions and was telling her what she was planning on doing with me. And at that time, my friend's mom told me everything. She told me what my mom was planning behind my back and my dad's back, obviously. And she wasn't able to pull it off because my dad wasn't going to agree, and then she couldn't tell him, and then all the paperwork dropped off where she just stopped filling out each packet where it got to my dad's information. And you can see in the packets where she was lying about problems that I had. Like, there were certain issues that I had, and like physical issues, and she lied about there being any problems so that way I would live suffering. And she lied about numerous things that would have been important that you really shouldn't lie about because it would cause extreme suffering. She lied in those packets when she filled it out. And so I brought those all to Charmaine, and Charmaine saw all of them. So this can all be verified because those showed up at my house about 6 years ago. She used my dad to bring those bins to my house. And now this is after, some people might remember when I was posting on Facebook during the beginning of my injury and I was trying to expose my mother for her crimes. And the abuse and the harassment and what she'd all caused, because she was the reason we weren't receiving treatment in an extreme medical emergency, why I was left with my brain swelling, suffocating here. I was doing that to expose her to her family. So I created the Facebook intentionally and started friending her family intentionally. And then I realized right after I made numerous posts, here she was sending poison batches of food to my house. This is like 2019, 2020. sending all these poison batches of food to my house, but she's making my dad bring it in. My dad doesn't know they're poison batches of food. He's doing what she's telling him to do. So, because she's not welcome in my house, here she is bringing all this stuff in my house. And because I was so sick and so close to death, one of the poison batches of food almost killed me. And I released a video about it called Poisoned Apple Pies and Lies. So if you go back and watch that video from last year, I released a video about it. That was one of the poison batches. But she sent so much over here at that time that I started freezing the samples. And that was also around the time I hired the private lab to test a hair sample, because I knew she was poisoning food. I just didn't know what the substance was. But in order to get the hit, you have to guess the right category. That's also why the hospital systems don't find the poison food. When you're telling them this and they're checking, they're not going to find it. They actually have to have the substance or the category. And they don't know that. The people that work there don't know that. So then I just look crazy, but I already knew that because I hired the private lab back then and I paid them privately out of my own pocket. So at that time, that lady told me she understood everything I said. She knew I knew what I was talking about. She knew we just have to catch her. And so she's the one who directed me to start saving the samples at that time, which I did. And then I recently lost them upon moving back to this house recently, after I moved away and came back. So I did lose quite a few of the samples. I have one left. It is a very important sample. I do believe it's positive. I do have one. But that was all happening at that time frame. And people thought I was crazy on Facebook, just talking all this shit about my mom. No, I was exposing her for what's really been going on, because she's been lying to everybody all these decades. None of what she's been telling anybody is real. And then I realized that she was she was still poisoning my dad very heavily. And the results of me doing that was going to end up getting my dad killed. So I had to stop posting anything at all. Then it was from that point forward, I just kept gathering all the information on all the crimes and everything that had been going on. And I knew I was going to release these videos eventually. I just didn't know when it would happen. But that was from where I kind of just stopped doing what I was doing at that time. And I wasn't able to do the videos or speak properly or deliver information because of how severely my brain was injured and how much knotted up carbon monoxide was in my brain. I couldn't talk properly or do the videos. So it took me all these years to get to a place where I could. So about 6 years almost. So I didn't post anything further, and I waited, and I just had to patiently wait and keep gathering information about all the crimes and everything going on. And then finally I started releasing the videos in the beginning of 2025, and I started filming in 2024. So that's how long it took me. And I had to stop because me trying to expose her, especially when I didn't have all of the information at that time, it was going to get my dad killed, because she kept poisoning him. So when she wasn't able to sneak the food into my house anymore, she still had full access to him. And then she was using him to try to get my older two kids in her possession, where he's bringing them back to her house, on like her behalf. She's telling him to do this. He's coming to my house, grabbing my older two kids. They're all going back to his house. She's repeating delusions to all of them. Then they were being brought back to my house, and everybody's screaming delusions when I couldn't have sound. And I'm living with brain swelling and suffocation. And eventually I did finally begin treatment at the private center on an outpatient basis, but this was an inpatient injury. And she's the reason that we were left for dead in the medical system with no treatment. So at that point, I stopped posting anything about what she was doing, and everything all that information that was brought to me at that time frame from back then. So it was probably around the time I was 15, 16, 17, maybe even 18. That's what was all in that bin. And that's what I was making those posts about at that time. Some people might remember it when I was making these posts on Facebook. And that's why I had to abruptly stop, because it almost got my dad killed. So that all happened. That's where a lot of this, the beginning parts of the information kind of came from. After I died and came back the first time, I came back with a significant amount of memories. I had lost my memory for some time, and then the pieces all slowly started coming back. And then she started sending my dad with some of the proofs of this. And that's how I have pictures of some of it. And then I brought some of it to Charmaine. So we do have documentation that all this showed up here recently. Now, okay, let's see. Oh yeah, with that, with how I got the charges at that time as well, there was no documentation that came in the mail that said I had a court date. So I don't know if my mother just told them not to send it to me intentionally. So that way I'd get picked up on a warrant and end up in jail eventually and have to go through the whole system in the worst way possible at such a young age. I don't know if she told them to do that, or maybe they did send it and she snatched the piece of mail from the mailbox so I wouldn't receive it. So that way I'd still end up in jail with a warrant. And she has a long-term history of snatching mail that belongs to me. Basically, from the time I turned a teenager on, she was snatching anything that had my name on it and taking it for herself. And then even after I moved out, any mail that came, I never received. She took all of it. And even when I had my first child and she was not invited to the baby shower, neither was any of her family. Apparently her family had sent all these gifts for me or money or whatever. She took it all for herself. She opened it all. She took it all. She kept it all. And I wasn't aware of it for about 10 years that even happened. So anything that came in with my name on it, including those charges, which if they did send it, she took the paper. So I'd end up in jail with a warrant. She regularly snatched the mail, so I'd end up having problems. And that's exactly what happened with the trust as well. So she took everything and made it look like I'm just this hot mess, nowhere to be found, running the streets somewhere. I'm just a mental disorder drug addict. Don't check my mail. And that's the way she portrayed it all these decades. And it's her snatching the mail, just telling people these things. So that's kind of what went on all that time frame. And then any mail going forward that ever went to their house, that's what happened because I didn't have their address going forward. Right when I turned 18, I got my own home. I've never had their address since then. I've had my own home the whole time. And then in between the time where I walked away from my home and got the next home, I had a P.O. box. So she never had access. She should have never had access to my mail, although I do know there was probably some mail still going there, especially pertaining to the trust. So that was a long-term issue with the mail, her stealing the mail. And that's also how I ended up with that warrant and ended up arrested over that situation. Yeah. Okay, so that's kind of what I wanted to talk about. This was all the stuff like pertaining to like right up me leading up to being age 18. And a lot of the proofs of it did show up at my house like in 2019, 2020. When I was heavily putting together what she was doing, like telling my dad what she was doing. I was trying to expose it to some of her siblings as well. And then she staged it to make sure I wouldn't be able to. She was like controlling my dad's behavior, and she was controlling the people around me and just repeating so many delusions that I wouldn't be able to talk to any of them to tell them anything. And because they lived so far away and I didn't have contact information from them at that time, she was able to carry this out. So I was trying to kind of expose it at that time, which I used Facebook at the time initially, and then I was trying to do it in person. But then I was still so close to death. I had just started treatment. I didn't even know if I was going to live. And it took many years to kind of cross several thresholds to begin to even be able to try to tell anybody what had been going on other than Charmaine. So that's kind of how it all got to that degree. Like all these years went by, and then this tote showed up at my house when I started exposing the lies, and some family members brought it back to her, and that's why the stuff was getting sent over to my house, and how I ended up with the proofs recent, like 2019, 2020. So it all ties together, but I am going to come back and I'm going to do the list of agencies and the amount of crimes and such that happened. Once I turned 18 and got into my own house, it started immediately within a couple days and never stopped. It's still going on today at age 42. So now it's been almost 24 years and it's still going on. And it's not going to stop until arrests are made. So I'll be back with more. Thanks. Bye.